And it's been a lot of fun to revisit Bob Dylan because I love listening to him. He has a really soulful approach to his music that feels like he's telling a story, one, and two, like actually talking about things that matter to him and not just putting on a front. They really sold me on the musicality of that. They really sold me on that standoffish demeanor of Bob Dylan. And I feel like he did a very good job of getting in touch with some kind of inner connection with Bob Dylan because the voice has that very similar sound. And then, like I said, every aspect of the physicality seems very similar as well from every bit of footage of Bob Dylan that I've seen. And I'm here to talk to you guys about it today so we can share our opinions and discussions on the movie. I do have fairly big complaints with this movie from my perspective that we've gone back and forth on a little bit in the Discord. Welcome to Backseat Directing, where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew, today here without Aaron to discuss the Bob Dylan biopic starring Timothée Chalamet, A Complete Unknown. 3, 2, 1, action. So, here again without Aaron. He didn't get the chance to watch A Complete Unknown with me, but I did watch it. I watched it with my fiance, Sierra, in theaters, and I got the chance to experience Timothée Chalamet's performance in the movie, which was really well done. And I'm here to talk to you guys about it today so we can share our opinions and discussions on the movie. I do have fairly big complaints with this movie from my perspective that we've gone back and forth on a little bit in the Discord. Make sure you check out the link below in the description to join our Discord so that you can be part of those discussions yourself. It is completely free. And if that link is expired because it only lasts a week, then go ahead and message us or DM us or hit us in the comments. And I will send you a new link to the Discord so that you can join and we can chat. But this movie, A Complete Unknown, it came out this year in December 2024, rated R, 2 hours and 21 minutes long. I'm not totally sure why this movie needed to be rated R, but it is. The description on IMDb says in 1961, unknown 19-year-old Bob Dylan arrives in New York City with his guitar. He forges relationships with music icons of Greenwich Village on his meteoric rise, culminating in a groundbreaking performance that reverberates worldwide. So it's another musical biopic, you know? We get one to a handful of them every year on the large scale. You know, we had Bohemian Rhapsody with Rami Malek that did incredible at awards season. He won Best Actor for portraying Freddie Mercury in that film. We had Rocket Man with Taron Egerton. So we're bound to get these, and the Academy does really like these movies. I'm not the biggest fan of them. This weekend I was going to see A Complete Unknown and Nosferatu, and we're going to try to see Baby Girl soon as well. And if I had to rank my excitement for the three of them, I probably would have put definitely would have put Nosferatu first, and then probably Complete Unknown second and Baby Girl third. So I'm not as excited for A Complete Unknown. I'm kind of wavering in the middle. I'm also a little bit iffy on James Mangold, which I know is like sacrilegious. So James Mangold is the director and writer of this film, writing alongside Jay Cox and Elijah Wald. But he's also this movie's based on a book as well. So one of those writers might be the author of the book about Bob Dylan's life. But James Gunn is the director of this movie, which, as we know about directors, kind of puts him at the helm of the creation of the story. And I feel like for me, it's been a little bit hit or miss. And I mostly, on the miss end, I mostly just mean that I really, really did not like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And I know that big budget studio movies like that come with a lot of oversight, but I did not like that movie, especially the third act of the movie. I feel like that franchise needed to die earlier. That movie just wasn't necessary, and I did not enjoy it at all. I didn't think it was good. James Mangold directed it, but James Mangold also directed Logan, which is great. And I've yet to watch Walk the Line, so I have to watch that as well. But Logan is phenomenal, and I thought he absolutely crushed it on that. So going into this, I wasn't going into it to watch a James Mangold film. That's what I'll say. I was more going into it to watch a Timothée Chalamet film because I've loved his performance in everything he's been in. I'd still say I love his performance in this. Before I get too far into describing the movie, let me do two quick things. I'm going to thank the audience for going ahead and clicking on this video. Thanks for watching with us. Make sure to hit the like button, the notification bell, and the subscription button as well to stay in touch with all of our cool content. We do post episodes every Monday and Thursday and short form content on all of our short form platforms every single day, including YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. So make sure to check us out on all those. The other thing I want to do is talk about who is involved in this movie in front of and behind the camera. Behind the camera, we usually like to start on that end to pay homage and show our respect for people that don't always get to see the limelight. But I talked about how James Mangold is the director and one of the writers of this movie. And then Jay Cox is also credited on the screenplay, and Elijah Wald is the one who is credited for writing the book. The cinematography of this movie is done by Fidon Papamichael, and the editing is by Scott Morris and Andrew Buckland. And let's see who did the music. Is that kind of complicated for this movie? Where is the music? They don't have it here on IMDb, which is a little bit unusual. Music department has 19 individuals in it, so it's, I guess, a little bit more complicated than usual. I'm just usually looking for the composer. This movie has obviously a complicated relationship with music because it's about a musician, and a lot of music in the movie is performed. From what I understand, they did a lot of performing live on set for the movie, which is, if you're wondering, it's a little bit unusual because normally they'll perform the music in a studio setting to get the best crisp sound quality, and then they'll lip sync the music live or sing it live and then dub over it with the studio music. Because when you have that crystal clear quality music from the studio, you can kind of play with it. When you start at the peak quality level sound, you can make it sound worse if you want to, but if you start with a worse quality of sound from performing live, you can't make it better very easily. So they did perform a lot of this music live to get that authentic feeling of the time because the movie mostly takes place in the 60s. So the movie has a very authentic feel to it, I will say. New York in the 60s looks great. The setting feels like you're drawn into that world, you know, in terms of all of the clothing and the props and the design of, like, even the details as fine-tuned as the furniture and the electronics and appliances in Bob Dylan's apartment in New York. Very interesting when you pay attention to them. But then the world is also created by the sounds of the music, right? So it feels very authentic because Timothy Chalamet is singing. And in my opinion, I saw a dialect coach talking about this online a while ago, the difference between an impersonation and an evocation. And I feel like Timothy Chalamet is more on the side of an evocation in this movie, where he's not doing a direct copy paste impersonation of Bob Dylan, but he's evoking the qualities of Bob Dylan through his posture, through the way that he moves his mouth, and through the way he casts his eye line. And then the inflection and tonality of the voice are very similar to Bob Dylan. I wouldn't say sounds exactly directly like him, but it sounds very close. And while still having the sound of Timothy Chalamet's voice in there to not totally erase that human quality that comes from putting your own stamp on the character as an actor. And I think it's really the perfect way to do things, you know, because I don't want it to feel just like it's recreation. I want it to feel like he's pouring, you know, Bob Dylan's heart out rather than just robotically copying Bob Dylan. And I feel like he did a very good job of getting in touch with some kind of inner connection with Bob Dylan, because the voice has that very similar sound. And then, like I said, every aspect of the physicality seems very similar as well from every bit of footage of Bob Dylan that I've seen. And he really embodies the character in such an incredible way. I think that it's an awesome performance. Now, his best performance of his career, personally, I don't think so. I've heard a lot of people talking about that. He's had a great press run for this movie, and I think they're really trying to push for that Best Actor win. Because everywhere you look, you see him wearing a Complete Unknown t-shirt. Every podcast, every sporting event, Timothy Chalamet is getting all over the world doing great press for this. I don't even know how he has the time. He's got to be one of the hardest working actors in Hollywood right now, because he's just did Dune Part 2 and he's already onto this, and it's like boom, 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 boom down the line. It is very impressive. He's been on Nardwuar, he's been on Brittany Broski, he's been all over the place. But in my personal opinion, I feel like he already cemented the best performance of the year with Paul Atreides in Dune. The Paul Atreides transformation is unbelievable, and I feel like this guy, who, I don't know, maybe weighs like 150 pounds, is insanely intimidating just through the demeanor and the performance and the aura that he brings to the screen as Paul Atreides, especially going into that third act of the film. It's my personal favorite performance of the year. And I feel like A Complete Unknown is a great performance, but for some reason the Academy loves these biopic performances where they can kind of match up like they are like, oh, I can look at us side by side, try to spot the difference, Bob Dylan, Timothy Chalamet. For some reason they really like that, but I don't feel like that makes the performance any better. I think these fictional performances are just as good. And because it's sci-fi, everyone's been saying Dune Part Two's performance isn't going to get any attention. I guess the greater reason would be that they're campaigning for a complete unknown. It seems like the route that they're taking is to campaign for him for that role. They're probably not going to put him up for two. That's very unrealistic. So he's probably going to get nominated for a complete unknown, but I wish it was Paul Atreides. That should be the short version of what I've just said over 2 minutes, probably. That both performances are great, but by far the dynamic range of acting he shows and the progression of the character of Paul Atreides to this unrecognizable person who just has so much bass and vivacity and a threatening manner to him that I feel like I haven't seen him put on before as an actor. So good when he yells at her to silence, like that scene is so strong. And also the physicality of that performance as well in terms of doing the choreography of the fight scenes for Paul Atreides is just fantastic. But let's talk less about Doom. Let's talk more about A Complete Unknown. I feel like the performance he does musically is so amazing. He looks like he's very comfortable holding the guitar and knows what he's doing in terms of hitting the chords. I'm not a musician, so I'm not a good judge of that. But from a non-musician perspective, it looked great. And then from like the actually listening to the music, like the the guitar sounds so good in this movie. Like all these little super quick notes. It sounds very intricate to me. Like I said, not a musician, so I don't particularly know, but it sounded like the way they talked about Bob Dylan in the film in terms of just being like a wonderkind on the guitar. Like listening to the music, it felt like somebody insanely talented, playing the guitar. So they really sold me on the musicality of that. They really sold me on that standoffish demeanor of Bob Dylan. One of my friends in our Discord, we've been mentioning him like every episode lately. He's getting so much attention. But McNeil put it in a great way, I think, in our Discord when he said that the film keeps Bob Dylan at an arm's length because Bob Dylan tried to keep audiences at an arm's length because he's more of a personal person. He was a famous person who seemed to not love being famous. He loved playing music, maybe more so than he loved the act of having fame, and maybe like the accolades and the approval has to feel good on some sense. But at the end of the movie states he didn't even show up to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature that he was awarded. So obviously not a big person on attention. Uh, but I think that's a really interesting aspect of the movie, keeping the character kind of at arm's length. They never really talk about his background the same way that Elle Fanning's character complains. Another great performer in this movie. She does such a good job. But as well as Edward Norton and Boyd Holbrook, too. Great cast. But Elle Fanning complains that all he ever does is sometimes he'll randomly talk about the carnival, but she doesn't really know his past. And it's a great way to highlight what they're doing to the audience because they do the same thing to us. We only really ever hear him talk a little bit about the carnival. We don't know about his upbringing or his past. He just wanders into New York at the beginning of the movie and goes to meet his hero, and happens to run into Pete Seeger, who's played by Edward Norton, who gives a great performance in this movie. There's one particular scene that I think of for his performing that is so strong, where he's watching Bob Dylan play and watching the audience kind of feel his music and interact with Blowing in the Wind, and his eyes are welling up with tears because Pete Seeger has this love for folk music, and he wants folk music to stay strong and alive in the community. He wants it to affect change, and he sees Bob as kind of like this instrument, no pun intended for the story about music, but he sees him as this instrument or this weapon in the fight against the death of folk music, and he's getting people to feel the power of folk music, and so he's overwhelmed by that emotion just watching him, and you can really feel that, all of that coming from Edward Norton's face. He doesn't have a single line in that scene telling you that that's what his character is feeling, but you inherently carry that from just the facial performance of Edward Norton. And then I thought Boyd Holbrook was so strong in this movie too. I'd love to see him nominated for Best Supporting Actor. I don't know how many people they're going to nominate or what other actors necessarily would be in contention, but in a short amount of screen time in this movie, he sold me so much on being Johnny Cash. And for me, Boyd Holbrook was the highlight of the movie. Every time he was on screen was some of the most times I was entertained in the movie, just because he brought so much like charisma to the role. Even his voice before he appeared when they were just doing letters, he really does a good embodiment of Johnny Cash, whose music I also love. But I've definitely been listening to Johnny Cash and the best hits of Bob Dylan since watching this movie. So that's a good sign of the movie. Even if I did have some complaints, I'll get into those complaints right now, by the way, that I mentioned to close out the episode. Great way to end the episode on a negative note. But the movie definitely has a strong suit to it that it's drawn me back to listening to those songs over and over again. Listening to Tambourine Man and Times They're Changing, Blowing in the Wind. Um, and it's been a lot of fun to revisit Bob Dylan because I love listening to him. He has a really soulful approach to his music that feels like he's telling a story, one, and two, like actually talking about things that matter to him and not just putting on a front to what the audience wants to hear. Maybe he doesn't even care about what the audience wants to hear if you fully believe the persona, but his music is very poetic in nature. I think that's why they tried to give him the Nobel Prize for Literature, um, because his music is written very much the way like an author or a poet would write a book. And he really does tell a story. Like Hurricane is a story, and it's 8.5 minute song. It's long for a song. It's a long story. But I want to talk about my complaints. My main issue with the movie, after I have given it a lot of compliments and flowers, so I think it's fair to get into this. My main issue with the movie is that I don't feel like they told the most interesting part of the story of Bob Dylan to me. I think they brushed over his activism. They brushed over the anti. It's in there to a degree, to an extent. They brushed over the anti-war sentiments, and they brushed largely over the civil rights movement because they do show him dating an African American woman, which would have been progressive at the time. It's the '60s, and they do show him, at a civil rights movement rally. They show him on a TV show, with African American blues musician playing guitar with him. Those things are contextually important to the time, but it doesn't really show how strongly he feels about these things, in my opinion. It doesn't really let his emotions shine through. And some people have said to me that his music, his songs tell that story enough. They play his songs in the music, and the songs tell that story of the sentiment. But I feel like for me, narratively, I would have wanted that to be a bigger part of the story because it's so emotionally rich. And as progressive a person as he was in the '60s is just really phenomenal and amazing. He was really ahead of his time on some things that we're finally just catching up to now sometimes, and he was looking really far down the line, a real pioneer of those of certain things, and when he really didn't have to be, when he was really set up well financially in terms of the success of his music either way, and continued to pursue those things. So I think that definitely shines a good light on him in my eyes, but I wish the movie had shined the light on that. They removed one particular verse from Times They Are Changing, which Times They Are Changing is a song I discovered when I first watched Watchmen, and it plays in that film, in the soundtrack and the opening, and it's my favorite Bob Dylan song. So I immediately recognized that one of my favorite verses was missing from it. And it's where he says, Senators, Congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorways, don't block up that hall. For he who gets hurt will be he who has stalled. Oh, the times they are changing. And that is important, I feel like, to who Bob Dylan is. And also, that's when I first heard that lyric was when I was like, oh, Bob Dylan's a badass. Like, who is this guy? Like, let me listen to more of his songs. Because he who gets hurt will be he who has stalled is essentially a threat. It's a threat to senators, congressmen, politicians who are standing in the way of progress, or anyone who's standing in the way of progress. It's just giving them that kind of nod and acknowledgement, that warning that people who stand in the way of progress are the people that are going to have to be taken down because they're an obstacle. And removing that song seems like trying to kind of put the movie on this even keel tone where it's approachable, where it's not too aggressive. But I don't think that being even keel or fastball down the middle is the right way to make media and make art. I think you should try to make something that's true, and I think you should try to make something that makes a splash, stands out. And I think that line is true to who Bob Dylan is. I think that's an important line, and I don't think it was cut for time. I think it was cut very intentionally. It's the crux of the song. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the crux of the song as a whole, but it's the crux of the only like politically averse part of the song because it mentions senators and congressmen. And I think maybe they cut it to just try not to piss anybody off. But it's very disappointing to me, and then disappointing to me to skip over parts of his history, maybe, or not skip over, but they chose to focus on a different element, which is fine. It's just not going to make me like the movie less. And maybe they don't care about me because I'm just one person. But I'm going to tell you guys how I feel. So I was very disappointed by that. I would like to see more of the activism involved in the movie. And I feel like while it is interesting the way he influenced music and the decision between the electric and acoustic guitar is obviously a big metaphorical decision that ended up rocking the world musically in that concert. Um, but to me, I feel like the more valuable part and more entertaining and more interesting part of the story to me is if they would have touched more on the emotional depth. We didn't even get to see some of the biggest emotional points in the movie, like the breakup between Elle Fanning's character and Timothy Chalamet's Bob Dylan. That was done in a time skip, and then it's referenced as having already happened. Which we can make those inferences, we can make those leaps and understand what happened. We're not going to be lost, but I want to see the emotionally rich parts of the story. So even if it's intentionally done to keep the audience at arm's length, also that Johnny Cash invited him not to have a drink after the concert, and we never got to see that come to fruition. I would have liked to see more screen time of them, those two iconic musicians going head to head, especially with these two performers embodying them so well. So those were a little bit of my disappointments in the movie. Overall, it is a good movie with great performances. I think you should check it out if you get the chance. I'd probably put it in my top 25. We did an episode on our top 25 movies of the year, but at that time I hadn't seen Nosferatu and I hadn't seen A Complete Unknown. So I think A Complete Unknown would still make my top 25 just because of the craft that was involved with it is very strong. One other thing I wanted to say, I think not a lot of people will recognize, is the amount of CGI and special effects shots in this movie, like the crowd simulations and the mapping they did over New York to make it look older than whatever location they were actually shooting at. There's a decent amount, here and there sprinkled out of special effects shots. I think a lot of people might not so much pick up on that. So just an interesting thing to pay attention to when you watch this movie. And I do think it looks good. The crowd simulations are very believable. And the hallmark of this movie is the music. The music tells the story. There's probably 30 minutes of this 2.5 hour, 2 hour, 20-minute runtime that is just straight music because they play full-length songs throughout the movie. And so if you're a Bob Dylan fan, I think you will enjoy this movie because he's portrayed very well as himself, and the music is a big part of the film. Like I said, just with that one caveat that I wish they had focused more on the activism component of his life, but they chose not to, and that's the filmmaker's choice and not mine at the end of the day. But thank you so much for watching this video. I think I've touched on pretty much everything I wanted to talk about the movie. I appreciate you sitting through this here with me. Make sure, like I said, to hit that like button, hit the notification bell, hit the subscription button as well. You can check us out. All our short form content is posted on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook every single day. And you can also join our Discord. It is completely free, and the link will be in the description of this video below. If that link is timed out, make sure to message, DM, or comment on this video, and I'll send you a new link for the Discord so you can join and chat with us about movies like this and all kinds of other stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and that's it.